Nabil will be giving out handouts in a few minutes. He's just waiting for people to come in. There's a major paper here that we're handing out called Fundamentals of Expert Systems by Professor Buchanan and Dr. Reed Smith of Schlumberger Palo Alto Research. This paper is scheduled for publication in the annual reviews of computer science next November. So you're getting a hot off the press copy. It's called Fundamentals of Expert Systems. And it's in preparation for the next 3 Tuesday sessions, which are semi-technical sessions on expert systems, knowledge engineering, and expert system development software. The first 2 of those sessions will be taught by Nancy Wogren, who's handing out those handouts right now. This is a truly excellent paper, and it constitutes the basis for what you need to know from the semi-technical sessions. The handout number 3 is a list of the speakers that will be talking at Professor Nilsson's seminar called Artificial Intelligence Research Applications. It takes place also on Tuesdays in this same auditorium, 11 to 11:50. So if you have that time free or wish to go to the Math and Computer Science Library to see it on videotape, then I think your time will be well rewarded by these quite well-known people in the field talking about artificial intelligence applications. That's not necessarily the same as expert system applications. Sometimes it's considerably broader. But many of the same people are involved. For example, Dr. Shortliff, Dr. Hart, Dr. Thorndike, Hayesroth, and so on. So that's an interesting lecture series for you to consider. The third handout corrects information on the office hours gives information on the reading for April 5th and provides a map on the back to get you to the place where the office hours will be held. The office hours will not be held in Margaret Jacks Hall, the computer science building, but rather in the offices of the Knowledge Systems Laboratory at 701 Welsh Road. Welsh Road is the nearest street to the hospital as you go from the hospital on the way to the shopping center. Maybe all of you know where the Haagen-Dazs ice cream store is. It's across the street from the Haagen-Dazs ice cream store, 701 Welsh. And it's Building A. And the room is at the far end of the ground floor of Building A, 1126B. You go all the way down the end of the ground floor of Building A, and there's a little suite of offices on the left. And you go in there, and 1126B is the office where the office hours will be held. The fourth handout is a little statement about the copyright on the manuscript that you bought. Since there was no official copyright notice on it, what I'm asking you to do on there is to actually write it on. That's important, because otherwise, if the right legal precautions are not taken, the copyright gets invalidated. So this is the official notice of the copyright. It also says that we still have several weeks to go before the galley proofs come back, and we have a chance to make changes. So I'm asking you to be beta testers for the book. It's almost done, but read it and find bugs in it, find typos, find things that are not clear, find concepts that are not well explained, and let us know. Be debuggers for this book. Nancy, any other announcements? Oh, I have one other announcement. Do you have any announcements? Yes.
The books that were recommended for the class that were listed in the thing you handed out last time, where
Use your mics, please.
where are the books available that were listed in the handout last time?
The Math and Computer Science Library.
To purchase?
Oh, you want to buy them?
Those have been ordered from at the bookstore. The required books have been ordered, and the strongly recommended, and they will be in the bookstore as soon as they get them in.
Don't worry about the fact that they're not there now. Or you can run down to Stacy's on University Avenue. Well, they have a lot of books that are in this area, so. And then another announcement will be, this is an announcement to the TV people. The people who duplicated the manuscript say that if you want a copy, you have to come over to their office on the second floor of Tresidder, which is called ASSU Lecture Notes. And you go in there and you get your copy. There appears to be no simpler way to get you copies other than you coming over and buying them at that office. And the last note that I want to make, which announcement I forgot to make last week, is that we don't take attendance at this course. So if you don't come, it doesn't matter. We'll assume that you're just going to go to the Math and Computer Science Library and look at the videotapes to keep up to date. With that philosophy, I would like to avoid the disruption of people getting up and leaving before the class is over. That's extremely disruptive to other people in the class. I hate it, they hate it, it's very impolite. So, if you come late to class, quietly slip into a seat in the back row. Don't leave before the end of class. If you know you're going to have to leave, don't come. Go watch it on the videotape. It's as easy as that.
And I do have one announcement. If you weren't here on Tuesday, come down to the TAs afterwards and sign a list. We won't circulate the list in the whole class again.
Yeah, we need name and we need department. We need email, electronic mail address so we can get a hold of you. Also, from last time's list, there was a problem that we saw that we're responsible for, so maybe you can help us correct the problem. The problem was almost no undergraduates were on that list, but yet this is a terrific course for undergraduates. So the reason was the department accidentally gave this thing a 400 number and it must have scared the undergraduates away. So if you know undergraduates who would be interested in this course, let them know, because there's plenty of room in the auditorium. It's not like we're stuck. So let the undergraduates know. Now I'd like to begin with perhaps the most important thing you'll hear in the whole course. Oh, I forgot to get these slides duplicated. People asked me for them last time, and I'll be glad to do it. I just forgot. So remind me to give you a copy of this afterward to distribute next week. Where we left off last time was with the question, what is the payoff from this purportedly excellent technology? This is a course about the real-world applications of expert systems, not hypothetical applications, not what could be done, not prototypes, not dreams, not laboratory experiments, but systems in place. Who's done what with expert systems, and what has been the gain in the corporate or institutional environment? That's the payoff. I'd like to deal with that for the first, I don't know, more than half of this lecture at least. The rest of the course will go into the details of that. Individual case studies will be presented. The people who did them will come and talk about them. But this is a summary statement. Back in the early 1980s, when all of this was getting rolling, by all of this I mean the commercialization of this field was getting rolling, it was possible to extrapolate from the experience at Stanford and a few other places, plus the early industrial experience at Schlumberger and DEC, to a few statements about what the likely industrial gain of this technology would be if that technology would get in place in the 1980s. That was necessary in order to capture the interest, the attention, and the money of corporate managers who had to make the investments. So it was reasonable to make projections of that. Therefore, at that time, in giving lectures championing this new area, I prepared slides like this, giving my best guess as to where things would go. I was kicking myself when I came in today that I hadn't actually dug out one of those old ones to show you what they looked like in 1980 and 81. This was a slide produced in 1988. And it contains some things on there that are old and some things that are new. And it's interesting to look at the surprises. What I'd like to do is to go over these items. There are 8 items on this list. I'd like to go over them one by one with examples, mentioning along the way which one were the surprises. The first item on the list refers to speed up of professional work. That is, how much faster can a professional or a semi-professional who is using an expert system to facilitate his or her work get the job done? How much faster? Now, let me start with just a couple observations. Observation number 1 is, notice that I said use an expert system to facilitate human work. I didn't say to take over human work. There is not a single expert system in use today that takes over a human's job. So if anyone asks you, if you're on a panel or anything, and someone asks you about computers taking over people's jobs, especially these new thinking machines, the answer is they don't. They facilitate human work, they make it go faster, they make it go better, but they don't take it over. What they do is add power. It's like the power tool metaphor that I used last time. They add power to human endeavor, but they don't replace human endeavor. So that's something to keep in mind, that there isn't a single expert system that has replaced anyone. These are intelligent assistants to human work, but they make human work go faster. Now, second observation is that when computers first arrived on the commercial scene in 1950 with the UNIVAC, no one observed, because it would have seemed platitudinous to observe, that the computer was doing multiplication or division or any arithmetic much faster than people. So the machine could multiply 1,000 times faster than people. So what? That's what the machines were for. Why else did we build them? Well, it therefore should not have been a surprise to anyone, including me, that machines would reason 10 times faster than people or 100 times faster than people. But in fact, that's what happened. That's what we observed. We observed at least 1 order of magnitude, and often much more than 1 order of magnitude, that is a factor of 10 or greater, up to a factor of 100, even more than a factor of 100. I'll give you one example of that. In the speed up of human professional work. I first got, so it's an absolute blind spot of mine that was not on my slides of the 1980s, of the early 1980s. Absolute blind spot. One day I was watching a video symposium broadcast by Texas Instruments. You'll see videotapes of that in our video theater. I was on that program, and I happened to be watching other segments of it, and there was a chemist from DuPont sitting at the console of a system, one of the expert systems they built, remarking to the interviewer that he was able to do a job that used to take him 4 hours in 15 minutes. And the arithmetic flashed right through my head. 4 times 4 is 16. Wow. Remember, I had in mind all along, the 1 order of magnitude makes a revolution. Remember that from last time? So the factor of 16 just hit me like that. And I went to look for the same thing in all the other interviews we did. With one exception, which I'll come to later, we never found less than a factor of 10. And that is truly spectacular. Now, for example, Northrop Aircraft in Los Angeles builds F-18, F-16 fighter planes. A fighter plane has 11,000 different parts that have to be manufactured. And if you count all the sub-assemblies that have to be built, there are 20,000 different things whose manufacture has to be planned. You don't just go off and make a part. You plan the making of a part, and then you send it off to workstations where that work gets done. There are people called planners, master planners, who do that. They're extremely highly trained, skilled people, and there's a long apprenticeship. So there are several master planners, many, and then a lot of junior apprentice planners. They do the computer-aided design on one system, and then the planner takes over and plans how this thing will actually be made. Such a plan normally takes 3 days to formulate, to write down. Now, that's not 3 days of human cognition. It's 3 hours of human cognition, but there are 3 people who normally get involved, so it's spread out over, there's wait time on people's desks. They've codified all of that knowledge, into an expert system. It happens to run with a tool that you'll hear about in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, called Key. And it runs on a Xerox Lisp machine, which you'll hear about. And it does the job in 15 minutes. An integrated job, so that it's not 3 different places to take the work. It does it all in 15 minutes. Okay, if you do even the conservative multiplication is 3 hours versus 15 minutes, right? So it's 3 times 4 is a factor of 12, right there. And they haven't even tried to optimize that, because once they got it down to 15 minutes, that's good enough. They've cleared out the entire backlog of plans that were building up. They had 1,000 plans or more in the backlog. They're all gone. The backlog's empty. DEC, as you know, as I mentioned, built a pioneering configurator for their VAX computer line, because DEC realized, being the leader in the mini-computer business, realized that mini-computer sales are a la carte computer sales. So they realized that they needed a configuration program to do the last stage before building the computer, manufacturing design. Well, IBM entered the market for mini-computers in a serious way only fairly recently with a machine called the 9370, and they realized that they too needed a configurator, because they calculated it would take the average salesperson, and call him a sales engineer or a technical salesperson, 3 hours to configure a machine. And given the volume that they were intending to sell, they couldn't afford 3 hours. Well, it took them 6 months to build this configurator. The target was maximum 3 minutes to configure a 9370. So even at the maximum level, at the worst case level, it was 3 hours versus 3 minutes, or a factor of 60. Actually, the average configuration of the 9370 takes a half a minute. So you're talking about now, that's, what did I say, a factor of 60? 60 times 6, a factor of 360. IBM Japan did an expert system for the scheduling of the production of printers in their Japanese assembly line, IBM printers. This is for production scheduling based on the arrival of parts, that is, what parts came at the end of yesterday and are ready for today's work, what kind of labor force will they have based on who reported for work, what's the customer order array on this particular day. They want to make just what they need to make and can make. That used to take 8 hours, and therefore it had to be done overnight, and it was a little hard to predict certain things that you needed for that run if you had to do it the night before. Okay. The expert system does it in 30 minutes. So there's a factor of 16 right there. They started at 8 o'clock in the morning, they're done by 8:30, and that's when they start their day's runs. The Canon people in Japan use an expert system to design zoom lenses. The expert system is a design front end to a lens CAD system. CAD stands for computer-aided design, but the CAD system is a numerical kind of system. That is, it understands the physics of the lenses. It can trace light rays through lenses to come up with figures of merit for the sharpness of the lens and other parameters of the lens. But somebody has to have knowledge about how to design lenses. What kind of glass goes in there, what thickness of glass, where the air spaces go, what air spaces do to the light, how thick a glass can you manufacture, or how thin a glass can you manufacture, and so on. All of that's in the head of the designers. The designers put it into the system. The system now allows a human designer to design lenses 10 times as fast as before. They've done that actual tests where they had groups go off and design lenses with and without the system. Factor of 10. Interestingly enough, Canon does not use that factor of 10 to save costs. It's unheard of in Japan to lay off. They had a group of 40 lens designers. They don't lay off 36 of them because they can go a factor of 10 faster. What they did was to tell the lens designers to try out 10 times as many new designs, looking for something highly innovative. In other words, they're investing in innovation with their productivity gains. Well, I can go on and on with these examples. I don't even have to give you industrial examples. I was giving this lecture to my own research group one day, and one of my people told me about the result that they had just gotten of an expert system that this fellow developed with people up at SLAC. The expert system was intended to find the lost beam. You know, SLAC has these big beams going around. Well, they're evanescent things. They're tiny, and they're steered by magnets. And if any of the electrical components drifts off of spec, you lose the beam. Well, where did it go? How are you going to get it back? What adjustments do you make that get that beam back again? That is a really big problem. It takes hours and hours and hours to find that out, using a numerical simulator to help them. But there is expertise, there's know-how. It's kind of a black art to know just what dials to turn, to take a good guess. Remember I said the art of good guessing last week? Take a good guess. This expert system codifies that know-how, and in tests that were done at SLAC and at CERN, it found the beam 30 times faster than people could find the beam. That's pretty important to SLAC, to get back on the air. Let's say if it would take 10 hours to find the beam, and now it can be found in a third of an hour. That's very impressive gain in productivity for an instrument that cost as much as the Stanford Linear Accelerator.
Question. But what's the case if you want to improve your expert system and the human being doesn't work anymore on this problem? You're going to lose on the long term instead of winning 30 times. Perhaps you win 30 times just now. But what's going to happen in the future? The human being doesn't work anymore on this problem.
Yeah.
You're going to lose expertise if this human being is out of work.
I would say let's hold that question. That question comes up again and again and again. And let's hold it till a later time when it will become an important issue. I'd like to discuss it in the context of all the other consequences of expert systems. There are a lot more than that one, so let's hold that one. Now let's talk about item number 2, internal cost saving. When a company introduces a new technology, almost always that technology is introduced internally first, not externally. That is, not in markets, but in operations. The reason is that companies understand their operations. They can get their mind around the operational problems. They can make estimates of how much they might save if they made the investment, and therefore they're more likely to want to make the investment early on in the internal work. That's almost always the case. Markets themselves are vague and unknown. You never know how much you're going to sell, so people are reluctant to make a big investment in what I call number 3 here. That was true of expert systems. That was true of the Schlumberger operation, but particularly the DEC operation. And DEC had a particular problem that it was quite concrete, namely that in order to build configurations of components that really did the job that the customer was buying a computer for, they needed to assemble all the parts, bring all the parts together at one place, put them together into the machine and test the machine, make sure it did it, called final assembly and test. And they had projected how many final assembly and test factories they would need for their projected sales of VAX computers in the 1980s. And it turned out through the mid-80s the number was 5 final assembly and test plants. Quite expensive operation. But the computers themselves were coming down in price. The margins weren't there to support such extensive manufacturing operations. So it occurred to several people at DEC, including the Vice President for Research and the Vice President for Engineering and the Vice President for Manufacturing, that it might be possible to do if the knowledge about manufacturing, about assembling these components, was carefully codified, and if a computer could think it all through, and think it all through without making mistakes. That maybe you could think through whether a machine would work or not from its components, rather than having to actually build it and test it and then break it down again and ship it to the customer. And that's what they did. That's what XCON was. XCON had lots of effects in DEC, but one of them was to avoid building final assembly and test plants, of which exactly 0 of those 5 were built in the 1980s. Now, there are gains from that. There are other gains as well. There are gains from, for example, configuring a machine wrong and then having to tell the customer, sorry, the machine we sold you won't work. And the customer comes back and says, don't tell me that. You sold me the machine. Make it work. Or, sorry, you need another backplane. To which the answer is, can't do it. I spent all my budget. You should have told me 3 months ago that I needed another backplane. So the savings from all those different sources, net of all the costs of maintaining the knowledge in the system that keeps the system up to date with respect to DEC products, is $40 million a year, according to the estimate, the number that DEC gave us to publish in this book. That is, we had them really go recompute for themselves what the number is so that we could publish an accurate number, and the number was $40 million. That seems like a large number. That is, it's a very impressive return until you consider some other numbers. IBM has a chip manufacturing operation in Burlington, Vermont. IBM is the world's largest manufacturer of semiconductor electronics, although they don't sell any of it. That's a pretty impressive statement. That is, they're bigger than Intel, they're bigger than Fujitsu, they're bigger than Hitachi, they're bigger than anyone else in making chips, all for internal use. And they have very large semiconductor manufacturing operations, one of which is in Burlington, Vermont. There are 4 fabrication plants on this site. Making a chip is a very complicated process. The 1 megabyte random access memory chips that they were making in Burlington when we saw them take about 300 steps, process steps. To make such a chip at those tolerances is the, I don't know the word for it, but it's the finest tolerance manufacturing activity that humans have ever undertaken. And it's not one step like that, it's 300 steps. Some of which don't have a high degree of tolerance, they're just dipping a wafer in a bath, but others have to have alignments and etchings, line drawings basically, at 1 micron or better. So it's a very exacting procedure. The machines that do this are sometimes, that is for some of the process steps, extremely expensive because they represent this extreme tolerance in manufacturing. For example, photolithography machines at $1 million apiece. So you can't afford as many as you need. They are also very temperamental machines. So they go down a lot. When they go down, all hell breaks loose, right? Here's this big queue of stuff. The wafers are coming in boxes. The boxes are piling up. And all of a sudden, this critical element, what's called an element at a pinch point, goes down. Queues start to build. There's a time factor involved in the coatings on these wafers. If you don't process this wafer in a certain amount of time, it has to recycle back and get an acid wash and then get dipped again before it gets exposed in the photolithography machine. The machines after the photolithography machine will not have enough work. But if they don't have enough work, it's not necessarily a disaster. It's just that they're available to handle more work from other places on the Burlington site that may need that, if only they knew that the particular operational place was not busy enough. Meanwhile, messages have to be sent to everyone, alerting everyone as to what's going on, alerting every operator at every workstation that more or less work is coming. Some work is coming back. Decisions have to be made about if only a limited number of boxes of wafers can be handled today because of the breakdown, is that going to be a customer? That is an IBM internal customer? Or is it going to be an engineer who needs a debugging run on a chip? Or any other class of customer that's coming down through the line? Who's going to get the priority? Well, the boxes of these wafers, the identification for each box of wafers is collected by a data processing system that knows where everything is, and it knows whether a workstation is not operating. The decisions that I was just talking about have to be made by managers. So you can think of this as a kind of semi-organized chaos in which everyone has all the information they need to do the job. It's just a horrendous job to keep track of all of that and keep it running on the fly, keep the throughput up. So it occurred to the head of the operations research group to, when he heard about expert systems, to do an expert system for this job. And they didn't bother to look around for any expert system tool. They just used a programming language that operations research people like, called APL, and they just did it without consulting anyone. Straight ahead, did their expert system. Now, when you go there, you see a terminal with a little geometric diagram of a piece of floor area with workstations. If there's a problem, you see a blinking yellow cursor on the screen. If you key up to that, put the cursor on that blinking yellow spot, then you can get behind it what wafers are affected, what the expert system's recommendation is with respect to each box of wafers, who should get priority, which are the critical items that need a human decision. Those have red flags associated with them. so that the humans can pay attention immediately to the really critical ones. The human can override any of those decisions if he or she wants to do that. The explanation is available. All you have to do is key on the item and you get the explanation for why the machine thinks it ought to do that. And if you don't do anything, it will just go ahead and send all the right messages to all the right stations and do all of that stuff. I asked the plant people to get together the managers for me so I could talk to them. And I did. They did. And I asked the question, what would happen, what do you think would happen if IBM management said tomorrow morning, sorry, you can't use the system anymore. It was an interesting experiment, but we don't want to use it anymore. And one of these managers looked at me blankly and said, oh, but life wouldn't be worth living anymore. He said, now I feel good when I come in the morning, and I can take a vacation. I'm literally quoting these people. Now I can take a vacation because my area is under control, and I can pass it on to the guy down the hall who's my friend, and he can manage it for me. Now, what's the payoff? Throughput increase. Throughput increase. How much? Well, the estimates vary depending on whether you talk to the people on the site or whether you talk to the home office. Interestingly enough, the people on the site are a little more conservative than the people at the home office, which you'd expect to be the other way around. But anyway, the numbers are 10 to 20% throughput increase. Let's use 15% as a good average number. 15% of what? Well, IBM won't give you the actual product value that goes through Burlington, Vermont. That's a company confidential number. But industry sources, various industry sources, make estimates of that, and I went and looked that up. So the estimate of the amount of product going through Burlington is in the high hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So pick a number out there and multiply it by 15%, and it's going to make DEC's $40 million look small. To give you another example, let me jump to number 5. Oh, I guess I will just mention number 5 because you'll hear a lecture on this, and I'll let the guy who gives the lecture give you the numbers directly. That's the American Express Credit Authorization Advisor. Again, this is a place where the company is being cagey for competitive reasons. So I had to compute the number myself. Bob Flast, when he comes here on April 7th, will give you a long list of gains. And from that list, and knowing only 2 other numbers, one of which I knew and the other of which I could just take a guess on, the other of which has to do with the salary that they would pay, salary plus benefits to an average authorizer, you could compute a number. And the number there turns out to be, depending on the salary assumption, $23 to $40 million a year. Now, that's not exactly why Bob Flast and American Express got into this. They were interested primarily in bad debt and fraud avoidance. But if you compute the whole gain that comes from bad debt and fraud avoidance plus the gain from speed up of the work of authorizers, $23 to $40 million a year. Okay, let me go to number 3, new products and services. Let me just give you some examples of that. Texas Instruments, they're probably the biggest company in the world in terms of amount of business they do in the AI area. They sell hardware called Explorers. Recently, they're beginning to sell a card that fits into Macintosh 2 called Micro Explorer. They sell software called Texas Instruments Personal Consultant. They have a division called Knowledge Engineering Services that offers custom system design and consulting for clients and gives them opening wedges into clients that they've never dealt with before. to allow them to sell other kinds of equipment besides expert system equipment or software. And they have a military systems division which bids on government contracts in the expert system area, and they have quite a number of those. Westinghouse. Westinghouse does a number of things with expert systems, but let me tell you one of them. It's in your book. Westinghouse steam turbine generators. Big pieces of equipment, expensive. The utilities, due to public pressure for keeping the rates down, have been running equipment which is rather old, repairing rather than replacing. Troubleshooting is very important, particularly early troubleshooting before this old equipment breaks down, because once it breaks down, it's very difficult, time-consuming to repair it. But if they can catch it before there's a disaster, it can be repaired fairly quickly. For example, if they know that there's a fault in the windings, and if they don't get it right now, the windings are going to untangle and then just spread out all over the place, that's a 3-month job. But if they can catch it before that happens, it's a 2 or 3 day job to replace the windings. So they have to know about that, early warning systems. Westinghouse sells a service to its utility customers. They sell them a data acquisition computer. That's wired by telecommunications to Orlando, Florida. There's a little war room there that has in it a computer and running a diagnostic program, an expert system. The diagnostic program feeds advice back to the utility. It also feeds the same advice to a screen in the war room where Westinghouse people can see if the operators out at the site have taken action on that and make their own assessment as to whether the operators should take immediate action. And if they see that the operators should and aren't, they give a phone call to the site and try to persuade them, human to human, to do something right away, get that thing fixed. Again, the proof of the pudding is, what are the numbers? They've been running it for 2 years with several utilities as their customers. So they have, statistically, N is pretty large. The average uptime increase over that 2-year period per turbine generator is 0.9%. Doesn't sound like a lot, 0.9%, but let's do the arithmetic. 365 days a year times 0.9 gives you approximately 3.5 days more uptime. A steam turbine generator in operation generates about $500,000 to $1 million worth of electricity, depending on rates and load and the actual turbine generator itself. So multiply 3.5 days by that number. Let's say even at the low end, $500,000 a day, you're talking about somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million per year. And the service cost the utility $100,000 a year. So it's a great deal for the customer, and it earns $100,000 for Westinghouse, the operation of this expert system. Good new business. Here's a new business that didn't exist before. A company that I hope you'll hear from this quarter was formed in Sunnyvale. Some friends of mine formed a company to package up expertise of commercial loan officers to assess the quality of a loan application. And most of the bank's business comes from loaning money, right? The place, and earning interest. The place to lose is bad decisions on the loan. The headquarter people have pretty good expertise about how to assess the quality of a loan from the application. The branch offices typically don't. What would happen if you spread out the expertise that the headquarters people have into the branches all over the state? Let's say Bank of America, take an example. The average quality of loan processing would go up. So there's a company in business called Syntelligence that sells systems like that They sell them 80% complete to allow the customer to customize the last 20% of the knowledge. And they bundle in the service of knowledge engineers to help the customer do that. Systems sell from anywhere from $500,000 to $2.5 million, depending on how widespread it is. Pretty good business. Well, if it's good business for loans, what about for insurance underwriting? They've done the same for insurance underwriting. Big customers like Fireman's Fund, Travelers, and so on. New business, didn't exist before. Two other examples. You go downtown to Businessland and you find on the shelf an expert system called Personnel Policy Advisor. It's called Personnel Policy Expert. You interact with it about the nature of your small business, how many employees you have, how old a business you are, what your revenues are, and so on. It just interacts, asks a lot of questions. And the end result of it all is it prints you out a personnel policy manual for your firm. You would have had to go to a human relations consultant to get that. Now you have it complete. Dismissal procedures, hiring procedures, vacation policy, etc. Everything you need. It was built by one expert who was the head of human relations for a big company, and one lawyer in Los Angeles. The two of them worked with a knowledge engineer in Santa Rosa, a company called Knowledge Point. Sells that system for $199. You go down to the software store on University Avenue, and you find ordinary PC tax systems. But what do? They're pretty dumb. All they do is take your numbers and compute your taxes for you. So you don't have to use the calculator. But there's a new expert system called Ask Dan About Your Taxes, which is a tax advisor, not a tax calculator. Turns out Dan is Dan somebody or other, a tax attorney in the Boston area, and his wife works for an AI company called Gold Hill that makes an AI programming system called GoldWorks. And she was the knowledge engineer and he was the expert, and the two of them did Ask Dan About Your Taxes. And it was reviewed in the New York Times 3 weeks ago. And actually it's one of the handouts that I gave Sue. You'll get a review of it. New business, didn't exist. In Japan, you'll see a chapter in the textbook you have, Nippon Kokan Steel Company, an expert system to advise on conditions in a steel blast furnace that might be catastrophic. Two different types of conditions that might be catastrophic. And when I asked, it was built for Nippon Kokan by Fujitsu. And when I asked the people, why did they bother when steel itself is a declining industry? Why are they bothering to introduce a new technology? The answer was, because steel may be a declining industry, it may be moving off to Korea and Taiwan, but the making of steel plants is not a declining industry. We intend to make steel plants and send steel making equipment. And with that, we have to send our expertise. That's why we're codifying this expertise about blast furnace conditions. All of these are examples of selling knowledge. Incidentally, let me just mention, since I mentioned blast furnaces, let me mention nuclear power plants. It's a very touchy subject. Nuclear power plants are on the decline in this country because people are afraid of them. They're not on the decline in France or Japan. But there's every good reason to be afraid of them. They're very complicated, and there are employee performance problems with people who monitor and control them. Those of you who read the New York Times saw, I think it's just yesterday, the main article in the business section, or maybe it was the day before, of the New York Times was about those problems in a major plant outside Philadelphia, which has caused the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to shut them down. And we all know about the troubles at Rancho Seco here in Sacramento. Big problem. Expert system to assist those people in running the control room of a nuclear power plant. That's been designed and built by the Electric Power Research Institute and is being tested in Taiwan right now, since no American electric power utility wanted to get involved with it. So the Taiwanese are going through the field tests of the expert system. One other thing I want to get into before maybe I'll mention quickly, return on investment. That's very important to businesses. DuPont. I hope you'll hear from the DuPont champion during this quarter. DuPont builds mostly small systems, the rabbits. 200 rule systems, 100 rule systems. The average system takes between 1 and 2 person months to build and returns to DuPont an average of $100,000 to $200,000 a year. Now quickly compute the return on investment for that. That is absolutely phenomenal. For 1 or 2 months' salary of a person plus an expert system shell that on a corporate license probably cost them $100 a copy, they're returning $100,000 to $200,000 a year. Where else do you see that kind of return on investment? Now, capturing company know-how was on everybody's chart in 1980 and 81, like mine. And indeed, it turns out to be a much stronger motive than I ever would have imagined. Almost everywhere we went, we heard that as the motive. But there are some extreme situations that characterize what's going on. For example, in your book you'll see one about Lend-Lease, the largest construction company in Australia. A very critical problem they have of estimating the time it will take to construct a high-rise building. And from that, they can then quickly estimate the cost of constructing that building. Estimating the time based on highly preliminary conversations with clients. Very important, because you get into a discussion with a company president about the new high-rise he wants to build for his company. How big will it be? Will it have glass on the outside? How many parking spaces do you need? Is it sandy soil? You know, where are you going to put it? In Brisbane, or are you going to put it in Adelaide, or where is that? And you're about up to lunchtime when the inevitable question comes up. How much will it cost me? How long will it take? And those people feel that they cannot afford to give the answer, I'm sorry, we don't have enough information yet. They have to come up with some answer quickly, and they feel they have to be within plus or minus 10%. Plus or minus 10%. Now, that's a hard thing to do. But they have a person in the company who is superb at doing it. So all those problems come through that person. Takes him anywhere from a few hours to a few days to get that number for the client. And it's almost always within the bracket. That person is 61 years old. Lend-Lease does not have an official retirement age. It has a pension plan that accumulates benefits, and at the point that the benefits are high enough, then you feel, and you're disgusted enough with your job, you make the decision to quit. There's no official age. And this guy loves his job, and he's very good at it, but he's 61, and his retirement pension has grown a lot. And they're worried about what's going to happen next. What decision? The decision to take this guy offline, to codify his expertise, to preserve it for the next generation of people, was so important a decision they had to bring it to the board of directors of the company, who said yes, and he went offline for 18 months, and he worked with DEC, actually between Sydney, Australia, and Hudson, Massachusetts, by electronic mail and a lot of airplane flights. And they built that system. Last story. Number 4, changes in the way a company does business. Sounds dramatic. Well, let me tell you this story about, and it's in the book, Navistar, truck company. If you don't know the word Navistar, you probably know International Harvester. Agricultural machinery, tractors, reapers, and trucks. Almost went bankrupt in the early 1980s. Got rescued somehow, restructured itself, changed its name to a new image, reached for the stars, Navistar, and a new attitude in the company, which is, we can't compete, we're going to be in this hole again soon, unless we start doing things differently. Can't do them the same old way. The same old way will just lead us down the same old rat hole. Got to do things differently. Be open to new ideas. The head of computing, head of technology, who's really an old line truck guy, a kind of evangelical guy. I wish I could have him out here. I mean, he's fabulous. Whose story we tell in the book, went to an expert system course offered by one of the small companies. And he got religion at that course, born again. What he heard about was DEC's computer configuration system for manufacturing design for the final stages of the configuration of a la carte computers. And he said to himself, gee, Navistar has a lot of parts. They have long axles, they have short axles, they have 4 wheels on an axle, 2 wheels on an axle, long beds, short beds, over the engine cabs, back of the engine cabs, showers, no showers, big air conditioners, small air conditioners, big engines, small engines, diesel engines, you name it, we have it. Why can't we build a la carte trucks for customers? Well, there's a real reason why you can't build a la carte trucks. Henry Ford, in the 20s, told my father, not me because I wasn't born, but he told my father, you can buy any car we make as long as it's black. And here's this guy at Navistar, John Boyer, thinking of, we'll sell you any truck we could possibly make. That is a revolutionary idea. Once upon a time, people used to say, in the computer, about us computer people, they used to say, don't fold, spindle, and mutilate me. Meaning, don't force me to be as rigid as your damn computers. Don't force me into a rut. Your rigid procedures are making me do things I don't want to do. And people were very angry. And some of us said publicly, it doesn't have to be that way. Computers are the absolutely most malleable devices, machines ever made by mankind. They're the universal machine. They don't have to be rigid. It's human procedures which are rigid. Computers can add variety to life, not take it away. And we talked about individualized instruction. That was the basis for Professor Soupy's work in Pine Hall, pioneering work on computer-aided instruction, and a lot of other efforts in that direction. Well, here is that same idea brought down into the Rust Belt. Make any truck I want. And that is hard to do. There's an assembly line that's there for a purpose. It's there for economies. It's there to get all the people at the right place at the right time with all the equipment and all the parts, and we make it right away. How do you combine the ultimate in choice at the consumer to the ultimate in rigidity at the assembly line? The answer is lots of thinking. You go from the customer order to all the parts orders, to all the instructions, to all the different stages in manufacture. Make sure when that bed gets there on the line, the holes are drilled in all the right places, and the right air conditioner is there, and the right bolt is there, and everything has to be exactly right, or it can't be assembled. I mean, that's literally true. If there's anything wrong, they have to take that whole thing offline. to what's called a special processing line, which is very expensive. So that's just the same problem that DEC had. That is the thing, everything has to be there to make the thing work. And that's what their system is doing. So now the customer can sit there with a salesperson, or when it's implemented, sit there with a salesperson, order the truck. The computer can, just as with DEC's adjunct program Excel, it can find out whether that particular configuration can be made, comes back and says, yes, I can make that, and I'll make it on Tuesday, May 5th, and it will cost you so much. Or it says, no, I can't make it for the following reasons, but here are the options that will allow me to make it. Choose one of these options. Since Navistar can't literally make every truck that anyone wants, but they can make a very wide variety, so it comes back with the options. Now, what's in the future for that? Well, now that I've made you a truck that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, because it's just your a la carte truck, and since no insurance company will understand that truck because we can't give it a model number, how about if we sell you custom-made insurance? And by the way, since you say you're going to haul strawberries in this truck, that means you must be cash rich in July and cash poor in December. What if we custom make a financing plan for you? You can see how this ties in with the rest of their business. Now, the message in here is the message, the title that I used for chapter 1 of that book. The quote that opens the book is Lester Thoreau, saying, the dean of the Sloan School at MIT, saying that economic progress is the result of working smarter, not working harder. And this is really the essence of working smarter. This is machine aids to a new way of looking at your business by working smarter, doing something you couldn't possibly do before. Okay. Here are some observations. First of all, you'll hear about expert system shells from Nancy and from Paul Harmon. I've already mentioned names of them like eMycin and Key, and there are many, many others. Texas Instruments Personal Consultant. With very few exceptions, maybe only one exception, the Canon people in Japan who started before any expert system shells were in Japan. Everyone was using expert system shells. Nobody was starting from Lisp or Prolog or BASIC or Pascal or Fortran or COBOL. Nobody was starting from there. Everyone was starting from expert system shells. Second thing is, most people were cherry-picking easy problems, which is a very reasonable thing to do at the early stages of a technology. Do it easy, do it cheap, build credibility before you take off to big things. There were very few Navistars who went into a very complicated thing as their first shot. Now, the FMC people who will come here and talk to you will make the other case, that in fact they really couldn't capture high-level management attention unless they did something spectacular to begin with. But most companies don't feel that way. They want to do the easy things first and have a quick victory. That says that from a computer science point of view, most expert system applications in the world are really trivial. But so what? They're trivial and very fruitful. Big return on investment. And number 3 and number 4 says that, first of all, computer people, not necessarily trained in AI, not necessarily MS AI students from the great program at Stanford, just ordinary computer folks can pick up this business in a course and get the job done fast. And the second point there is that experts themselves are pretty smart. Engineers, for example, manufacturing people, they're pretty smart people, and they can pick up the technology and do it for themselves. Well, this happened to us before. It's nothing unusual. When Fortran arrived on the scene in the late 50s, Fortran liberated the engineers from the programmers. An engineer could write his own program or her own program. A physicist could write his own program. You didn't need to go to a priest called a programmer. Well, for at least half of these applications, you don't need to go to a priest or priestess called a knowledge engineer. I noticed several in the room. You don't need to go to them. You can do it yourself. Now, that's not true of the complicated ones. I gotta tell you that right out. I mean, that's important to know what it is you don't know. When you get to some of the complicated ones, like the Northrop application or the Navistar application, those are examples. The American Express application, you need some help, but which means you need an MSAI course or something like that. The next thing you need to know is technology insertion. It does not happen by itself. Does anyone happen to know when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone? 76? Well, I heard an ad last night on television that said that universal telephoning dated from 1907. It was an AT&T ad. So that is 31 years from the invention of the telephone. How many years did it take before the laser was anything but a curiosity device? Professor Towns invented the laser, and Art Shallow here at Stanford. Probably, what, in 52 or something like that? The laser? Well, it took a long time before lasers were being used to repair eyes and to read little pit holes off of compact discs. And technology takes a long time to get into industrial activity and commercial activity. And it takes more than time. It takes charismatic champions, people who are willing to give 100 speeches on the same subject and go to every little nook and cranny in the company and pound on people's doors and sit there until they understand and persuade. And generally these people are they're not up here. Generally the champions are down here. And therefore they have the energy, but they don't have much clout. And so it just takes more and more energy to get that story across. Now, occasionally the champions are up here, like the guy at Navistar, or the guy at DuPont, or Bob Flast from American Express. He was sort of halfway up the chain. So you need to either be a champion or find a champion if you want to get this technology inserted. We didn't see any places where it inserted itself, just because it was a great technology. The other thing is that the champion has to be given some resources. You'll see the story in the book. The reason we put Northrop as the first story in the book is because it was such a revealing story about champions. Ken Lindsay and his little Apple computer, and his racing around the company looking for people to help him, and his discovery of the senior VP for research, who turned out by accident to be one of the great aficionados of AI of all time, and how this guy gave Ken Lindsay resources that he needed. And it's a terrific story. But you need to keep that in mind. Technology gets inserted by the energy, the charisma of individuals called champions. Of course, I didn't discover that. I mean, that idea has been around for ages, and it was popularized by Tom Peters in the book In Search of Excellence. Now, the other thing let me then just finish with two things. Can you show this one, please? The chief executive officers and the people at the vice presidential level just below, there's no trouble with them. Those people, ask yourself, what do they do during the day, right? They're getting paid a high salary. What's their job? Well, their job isn't pushing paper. Their job isn't line management. Their job is vision. They're supposed to have strategic vision. Where's the company going? What's the grand scheme? Where's the plan? Then they hire a lot of people to implement that. That means they read a lot, they think a lot, they listen. They're supposed to plan. They hear about a technology like this, and they think it's great. It offers tremendous return on investment, productivity gains in human work, and so on. And they tell the folks down the line, go do it. The people at the bottom are young people. They're always looking for new ideas. They just came out of college. Their head is full up with new stuff. They've just taken CS408. They're alive. They have energy. They love it. In the middle somewhere are the people called the middle managers. Those people are paid a lot of money. They're working 12 hours a day. They have deadlines. Their career is on the line. They don't have enough time to learn. They don't have enough time to read. They don't have enough time for anything. They're harassed, especially MIS managers, data processing managers, management information system managers, have been burned every single day of their life by some software that didn't perform. And they are really gun shy, and they don't have time to think, they don't have time to take a seminar, they don't have time to do any of that. That is the real problem. Stuff can't get through that layer. Now, it really doesn't matter much in Japan, where everything bubbles up from the bottom. It's the young people who tell the middle managers what to think, and it's the middle managers who tell the top managers what to think. Japan is a bottom-up structure. But it's a big problem here in this country, because we think of things as being a top-down organization, and that makes it tough. So I listed them as number one in my dimensions of pain. Second dimension of pain is the AI companies themselves. In an industry that started up in the 80s with 100 different little companies all trying to distinguish themselves in some little niche, no standards. Everyone, remember I told you yesterday there are only about half a dozen different ways to think about inference? Well, there are a similar number of ways to think about representation. Rules, frames, predicate calculus, expressions, hardly anything else. Semantic nets. You would think that all of these people would then come up with a common terminology, a common set of modules, and not confuse the customer. Wrong. Everybody has their own names for everything. Everyone has their own funny way of implementing things. No standard ways of representing rules. No standard ways of handling variables in rules. And all kinds of issues confuse the customer. Well, you confuse the customer, you pay a penalty. The customer doesn't buy. That's the problem. Lisp. Finally, after 10 years, the government, through its main funding agency, got the little companies and the universities to agree on a Lisp. Not everybody's own Lisp. Common Lisp. Except there's no Common Lisp. There's Common Lisp 1, Common Lisp 2, Common Lisp 5, Common Lisp 86. Nobody's Common Lisp is the same as anyone else's Common Lisp. The third thing, which I don't have time to discuss much today because we're running out of time, is large knowledge bases. Expert systems, an expert system represents a tiny sliver of knowledge. But that makes them extremely fragile. If you exceed the boundary of what they know, even slightly, their performance catapults from excellent to nothing at all. And we can only solve that problem by expanding the knowledge that these programs know. That's a very big job, a job of 10 years or 20 years of research. And finally, there's the problem of the impact on knowledge workers. One issue about that was brought up before in the audience, and I put it off till a later time, and I'll put off a broader discussion of this. But let me just mention one other aspect of it to leave you with an uncomfortable feeling as you leave this room. What happens, let's take a case. My friend, Dr. Fallett, Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco, helped us do the PUF system, which is now a commercial product. Pulmonary disease diagnosis. Analysis of pulmonary tests, lung tests. And he's on TV, McNeil-Lehrer show, 1983, and he says on TV, if a machine can do 80% of the problems right, that's fine with me because the other 20% are the interesting cases of medicine. And I'd love to spend my time on the interesting cases of medicine. And then if you went to a DEC manufacturing engineer, no, let's say a diagnostician who says, well, this system works 95% of the time and it leaves me 5% of the interesting computer diagnostic cases to diagnose. And that's great because I'm wasting my time on the other ones. And now you go to a DEC manufacturing engineer and you say, well, how much satisfaction do you get from the one case in 10,000 that XCon can't do? And at that point, the question gets a little sickier, right? And then what happens to a diagnostician in, say, IBM disk diagnosis, where the program is doing, for the classes of diagnosis, they're doing 100% accurate diagnosis. The whole issue of job satisfaction changes from leave me the interesting problems to what do I do when there's no problems left? What's my job? That hasn't yet been felt because not enough expert systems have reached that level to make people uneasy. But you can just see it build. And we heard it time and again in the interviews. People expressing this uneasy feeling that the day was arriving soon when their jobs would not be all that happy. They weren't worried about losing their jobs. They were more worried about emptiness in the job. Okay, next time, technical issues.
Come up and sign a class list if you weren't here on Tuesday or didn't sign it on Tuesday.
You didn't get handouts.